Welcome back, guys, to our Swift Talks. Today we're joined by Aqeel Phool, who is the head of software engineering at AIQ. Aqeel comes with almost, 14, 15 years of experience in multiple industries. So he's worked in telecommunications, e-commerce, retail, oil and gas. Now that's the latest one, right? And his focus has been in AI. And today we're talking about the most important topic is the unpacking the complexities of AI in business, right? Overall. So let's start with a simple thing, right? So what is this whole complex thing of AI? Like businesses, whoever I've spoken to, are always looking at AI as if it's a new monster. They're treating it as if it's a new hype, right? So is it a hype or is it something real?
Okay. Ramesh, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk on I would say, such an interesting topic. So I will go one step back. I would talk about the fact that AI, how exactly to define that. So it is more like mimicking human intelligence, and it's not new. I think the hype is more new around that, but AI has been into the industry for several decades now.
True.
And if we only talk about like with the Gen AI, with ChatGPT, etc., it has got a lot of hype of late. But AI has been in the business and serving for a variety of use cases. For example, speech recognition is not new. Natural language processing is not new.
True.
These have been there. For example, Microsoft Office released speech recognition back in 2001.
Yeah.
So it has been there. What has changed now is the ability to process vast amount of data, which was not the case before. Advancements on the computing infrastructure itself, availability of GPUs, other cloud infrastructure that enables you to build AI systems. For example, large language models, if you had to do 10 years ago, it would have been such a difficult task.
True.
But now, given all the advancements on the infrastructure, it is possible. So overall, I see that businesses are seeing a lot of opportunities, primarily because of ChatGPT of late, but there is a lot of depth.
And also, I think the shift that has happened because of ChatGPT, so I won't say ChatGPT, but technically speaking, the transformer architecture
Yes.
is that the inference time has become very easy, right?
Yes.
So there was a time where you could have the Microsoft example that you gave, right? Back in 2000, early 2000s, you had the speech to text.
Yeah.
I remember it used to take, for a 1 minute of text, it would take like 5 minutes to transcribe.
Yeah.
Right? And it would not be right all the time. So two things that have happened really quickly, from my understanding at least, is that inference time has fallen and the accuracy has gotten very, very good to perfect. Right? Of course, there are hallucinations. I'm not saying they're not there, but it has come very good to becoming, as you said, mimicking human intelligence.
Yes.
Right? You can think of the current Gen AI as like a 4-year-old or 5-year-old child
Yeah.
who has a good understanding of language,
Yeah.
right? But lacks the other things that a normal adult would have,
Yeah.
right? So coming back to the business aspect, right? Do you think it's a good time for businesses to start working on actual AI projects themselves, or should they pick up something off the shelf, right? Because open source is filled with, you can go to Hugging Face and find the latest model that will do XYZ things, and within days gets toppled over by another one. Or should they go and try to build something in their own using their own training data?
I think I would actually break this into two pieces. For example, the first part is industry specific. For example, there are industries where you could use off the shelf tools. Wherever you want to talk about, like, for example, customer support, etc., there are chatbots. Again, chatbot industry has been there in the market for some time.
Yes.
Recommendation systems and all of these sort of things. So wherever you talk about these sort of things, AI has advanced over there. Even ChatGPT, it did not go into other domains, but it actually focused on the chat aspect itself. But when you go into, for example, industries like healthcare, you go into banking, you go into others, you have to use and you have to look at the AI from a different angle. Yeah? I think the other thing is there is a cost associated with AI. It doesn't come without the investments that you have to get into. For example, I'll talk about data quality. This is like one of the key ingredients for an AI system to work. So if you want to use AI for your specific use cases, where your data is, for example, is not exposed to the public world, in such a use case, you will have to rely on your data And now you come across variety of challenges. For example, data silos. You have to look at the data quality. You have to see you are feeding enough data to the AI model. All these fundamentals have to be there. So when you go to in any of the industries, you will have to come across all these barriers and you will have to solve them. So going back to your
So
question.
one point there. So this is a common thing we've seen with anyone whom we advise.
Yeah.
Is that now that AI is here and now that businesses are waking up to the potential of it and now that they're realizing it's not just a random hype that will go away like virtual reality or Web3, they are now realizing that the data that they were promised was available to them.
Yeah.
Right. It's not the way they expected it to be, right? It's not in that one big database where you can just make a query,
Yeah.
right, and get. Now they're realizing it is spread across in different silos. And if they want to actually start training their chatbots or their AI assistants with the data, they have to go through different systems to get.
I'll give you a real world example. For example, if you want to train a chatbot for your HR policy and procedures or databases, now you would think it's an easy task, right? But if you break it down, you will see that you have to go through a bunch of PDFs, and some of those PDFs could have nasty images that you have to convert using some sort of OCR libraries. And there is a lot of data processing behind the scene. And you have to reach to a point where you can use that data or textual data that you can feed into a textual model. But before that, all of this is around the data engineering. In a typical project, it can be between 60 to 80% of the time going only on the data phase. The modeling, as you said, you can find a lot of models from Hugging Face or open source market. So that's not a biggest challenge. Of course, for specific industries, that also is a challenge. But for vast majority, the challenge is around data silos and data preparations.
Exactly. So it's not a choice of whether you're taking open source or closed source, AI training or fine tuning a chat GPT 4 or versus whatever other options you have, like a Gemini or whatever. But the question is more about, do you have the right data? Do you have access to your data that can be pushed into those training modules for those AIs, right? Because anything will work. And it's important that you don't. So we advise our customers also, don't get married to one particular AI. Because there's always going to be another one that might do something better, right?
That's true.
Like image passing. ChatGPT does image passing. Bing does image passing. Gemini does image passing. Lava does image passing. But some of them will do some things better. After the passing, there's someone who has to write the content. Llama 3 may not be able to do that good in your specific case, right? So it's always good to keep those things decoupled, right? And as we say always, keep a very composable architecture to the whole thing that you can swap those things out and replace it with the right tools as and when you feel the need, right? So jumping from that to a more serious question around the AI, right? So where is the risk for a business? Because I've seen this in some of the organizations that we work with or have worked with in the past. They have started banning the use of the free open source chat GPT or Bing and whatnot, right, within the organization. Because there is a real worry that someone might paste their company's quarterly financial results into the chat, and that might end up as training data for the AI. And then a third person a week down the line might just ask, what is the performance of company XYZ in the last quarter? And boom, you have the actual data, right? So is that something that businesses should worry about, or that you think they're panicking?
I think you're right, because technology in some way has gone leaps and bounds, in the last few years, and frameworks around like how to protect data privacy, and all of that, I think is kind of like catching up at the moment. Not only in one specific region, but across the world. This is the situation. So it really is essential that you can go back to the basic. You can define how exactly your data should be protected within the organization. And you don't have to be afraid of using these technologies, but you need to define your boundaries. What kind of data can be fed into, for example, a public service versus not. And I think also the investments should go into having local copies or self-service models within the organization where you can actually empower your people by deploying it yourself. I think the focus should be on having, I would say, internal AI teams. It depends what level of company it is, like whether they can afford such an investment or not. But if a company is already worrying about data confidentiality, data privacy, and so on, I think they definitely can invest into these sort of directions where they can actually bring custom-made, tailored solutions for their AI needs.
Valid point. So I remember one of the companies that we worked with, they actually got a chat GPT local instance on their Azure subscription because OpenAI is partnered with Azure. And so they were training based on the internal company data on that model, and that model is accessible to the company insights, right? That has a limitation. So in my opinion, it's a mix of training your people to not do stupid things like pasting the entire company financials into an open platform. At the same time, also giving them the flexibility of generating sort of the assistant steps that you might need, right? I don't think we discussed this, but the role of AI, at least in my opinion, is not to be a replacement, right? It's an assistant. And at no point in the future will it replace the work, the creative work that humans do, right? So it needs to have, you need to be, I said in the past, that there has to be some guardrails put around.
Yes.
How the data that is going in and the data that's coming out of these models are being utilized, right? And what is being surfaced. This also brings me to a very nice point about security in these models, right? There were reports out in the wild that there are certain keywords in some of these open source models that you can type in, and it exposes all the underlying data models. So you could specify, say, a keyword, let's say it was Gemini, right? Gemini, and then the name of the company or name of something, and it will give you all the training data underneath, right? A Gemini bias show biases. And that will just bypass all the security restrictions that you had put on your training of the model. So how should a business handle these kind of things?
I think I would go one step back where you were talking about the guardrails. I think in a simplest manner, we usually have in any of the models, you would have a pre-processing as well as post-processing steps. Where in the pre-processing steps, of course, you will make sure what kind of data you are looking into. I'm not talking, but for example, from a training perspective, of course, you have to make sure all of this, like you are feeding the right data and you are not feeding into kind of like anything that should not go into the model, because all the data governance that exist in systems outside AI should be persistent and should move into AI systems as is. So these are the sort of things that you have to bake into when training the data. You can have several, I would say, several smaller, for example, models for very specific use cases, rather than having one gigantic model that can actually do everything, because then you can control.
Like you said, right? Like a general purpose AI will always be worse than a specific model, right? Like always, 9 out of 10 times, a general purpose AI's output will always be worse than one that's designed specifically for that particular task. Right?
So going to your exact question, I think pre-processing and post-processing, where we can kind of have controls over what the model is generating, what model is being fed into, and what it is generating. And this is where people like engineers or people who are developing these systems, they play a role. But in terms of from an organizational perspective, organizations have to define the data, for example, classification levels. What are the different classifications of the data and how we can protect against each classification? And that's what I'm saying. It could be like we have to explore various approaches to that, but one approach could be having separate models per data classification level, for example.
So like a governance layer within the AI model itself, that first checks what is your eligibility, or what are you allowed to see, and then gives you that, right? Or the other way around, where it spits out the output, but there's another layer on top that checks, are you eligible to see the output? So we could look at a case where, let's say, the store staff and the store manager and the regional head and the president of the company all have access to the same AI that tells them the store performance. But there is a layer on top that prevents the store staff from knowing the overall company performance. Right? So that sort of governance can exist if it's built the right way. So architecting that is very, very important. Keeping all of this in mind. In my experience, at least what I've seen is that security and governance are mostly ended up as afterthoughts. And this is something that you cannot get wrong in AI systems.
That's true.
Has to be upfront with your security and your governance layers
Yeah.
and you have to design them from the beginning. They are not an afterthought. That's something you have to do.
That's true.
beforehand.
That's true.
So this brings us also to a very important point about where is this whole agent and so like when AI starts growing and becoming smarter and smarter, right? And we know that specific models are going to do better than a general purpose one.
Yeah.
Where do you see the future of AI in that scene?
This is a very complex question. Of course, we are predicting AI. Yeah. So where it heads,
Yeah.
but just looking at the trends, how AI started and where it is, and then where we see. Of course, it is a personal opinion. I think, of course, it is started with understanding patterns, detecting patterns, predicting, forecasting, simple stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then now it has got into more like content generative aspect of the AI itself. And this is where I think at this moment it is doing, I would say, fairly well. But the right approach at this moment would be to use an advisory approach for a lot of use cases. I'm not saying for all the use cases because it all depends on the level of customization that you do on top of the AI models itself.
Yeah.
But for most use cases, if you use an advisory nature of the system, you would benefit the most from a business perspective.
Yeah.
But moving ahead, I think it would get into kind of, I would say, intelligent systems where they will not only mimic human from a task to task level, because how we have seen AI so far, solving one task, and human has to orchestrate, human has to kind of intervene, human has to go through all back and forth, which is like co-pilot. That's what we are saying. But eventually, I think it would start getting growing around this workflows, or for example, business processes, where, for example, if you are supposed to send an email to someone based on some data in the database, and you want to have some analysis before that, you can basically just talk to the AI. It can design its plan of action.
Yes.
It can go into what all needs to happen, and then talk into multiple systems.
Yes.
In fact, this is already there, but I'll go to the future form. So it has to do all these behind the scene tasks and then send an email. Okay. It's a very simple form of where AI is heading. But if you go into a complex use case, you can imagine you have a main agent or your AI that can talk with multiple agents or tools or technologies behind the scene. It can do market research for you. It can actually solve complex mathematical problems for you. It can even write algorithms for you, and it can validate its own outputs and all of this. And then it has a system of systems or system of agents who talk to each other. They can complement each other, and they can solve a more complex problem for you.
So like a general adversarial network of agents, right?
Yes.
Working all against and trying to validate each other's thing.
Yes.
So sort of the thing that happens in our heads, right? Whenever we're trying to take a decision, we look at the pros and cons and we try to weigh each input or each output and see what's the right one, wrong one, what are the repercussions of that. So something like that, like, so you're basically talking about AGI, right? As a system of things.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll not get into that because that's way far in the future and that involves its own controversies. But down to the application layer of these things. What we've seen also as followers of AI also, that the training part is the most complicated, right? When it comes down to inference, however, the hardware required for inference is not the same as that's required for the training aspect.
Yeah.
So in the future, do you see that, like with human AI thing, right? So human AI, as you know already, what it does is it takes the inputs from the device, sends it over the cloud, does the processing and sends it back.
Yeah.
And the downside of that is that it takes time, right? And your phone does it much faster.
Yeah.
So there, if the device, the machine model, the model was running on device and was able to at least get the right, I'll use a very wrong term for this, but get the embeddings out of it as an example, right? And just use those to ask the question in the cloud.
Yeah.
Whose response will be much faster, right? Because you've done one level of processing on the device, push that out to the cloud and got the response, which will be much faster.
Yeah.
Right? So it's basically, like I like to put it, is your camera takes say a 5 MB photograph.
Yeah.
Right? you don't need all the 5 MB. You can just bring it down to like a half a MB file size and send that over for processing, right? That gives you more information.
Yeah.
So some sort of this, if it is possible, right? Instead of even sending that 5 MB file, process it on device itself. Do you see that as a future thing that will happen?
I think, in fact, it is happening right now. I'll give you some examples. So, for example, we can break this into maybe multiple models. So, one of the model is where you would run your AI inference in the cloud. You also have a model where you are running your AI inference on the edge itself. For example, Llama models running on phones and all of this is an example of that. And then there is a third model, which is about a hybrid approach where you can run part of AI inference on the edge, which is like business critical, which is like you cannot afford latency, or it has to, even from a security perspective. It's not only about hardware limitations, but it's also about from a data privacy and security perspective, whether you can go outside a closed network or not. And there are scenarios and cases where you cannot. Yeah. So in these kind of situations, you have to really run inference on the edge. One example would be, in the beginning, you were streaming these videos into the cloud or into an external network, and you were doing over there. Now we are seeing cameras, all these cameras coming up equipped with GPUs next to the camera itself.
Nice.
So you can run a lot of analytics on top of that, and you can do basic inference over there itself. And all AI, for example, any of the edge devices as of today, if you talk about Jetsons and all of these sort of devices, they can run inference on the edge itself. All the robots are, for example, using that sort of technologies. So yeah, I think it is more and more moving into the edge itself. With the technological advancements, especially the GPU architecture is evolving very fast.
Yes.
And with all these inventions, of course,
things are moving way faster.
Yeah, exactly.
Fair. One last question, right? So, as the evolution of AI is happening rapidly, do you have any advice for the business owners or business heads or technology heads or people who are in charge of AI generally, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to go specifically into what you do exactly because there are certain restrictions there. But is there an advice about where the future is going and how they should adapt to that future? How should they wait for things to change, or should they start on some things right
No, I think anyone who has not gone with the ride at the moment, I think is behind at the moment. So we definitely, as business advisors, I would say myself as a technology advisor, we need to embrace this innovation and technology because it can bring a lot of, I would say, it's almost a revolution right now. Yeah. So unless you understand it, unless you understand challenges around that, because a lot of people hesitate because of the challenges. Yeah. But you don't have to hesitate because of the challenges, but have policies around how to solve those challenges, how to come across those challenges. So the deeper you go as a company or as a business, you will understand these challenges are there, but there are ways to mitigate them. Data security, privacy, for example, even I would say like computational power itself is something that you have to plan for. It's not you can have without planning. So of course, your architecture around all of this is something you have to plan, and I would advise businesses to definitely get into that.
Sure. And that's the thing, right? Like, given the hype cycle around AI, the size of the project seems so big, seems like a massive investment. But honestly, it is not. I mean, we've deployed use cases of very simple thing, right? You get images, you have to write alt text for SEO purposes, right? You have, say, 1,000 images. It will take a human being at least 5 days or 6 days to sit and write the alt text for all of them. That's why you end up start using like the name of the image itself, so name of the product as the name of the image, the alt text for it. And that causes more problems than it solves. It takes 5 minutes for an AI to process 1,000 images and generate these actual alt text for which actually describe the image. And deploying these smaller solutions, subject line generators, all these tiny little things that you can run either on the cloud or on your device today, that is a win. That is the 5 days of productivity that you won from the world essentially, right? And you made your more teams more efficient. And if you're not doing that today, there's a serious gap in your the way you're thinking about the future,
Yeah.
right?
I think there is a difference in adopting AI versus scaling AI, and this I can tell you from experience. So adopting AI sometimes seems quite intuitive. You can get into that. You can actually do that for example, one specific use case.
Yes.
You can roll it out for a couple of users, maybe 5 users. But when you scale up, similar to any other computing systems, there are patterns around that. There are there is a discipline around that. You have to how you will scale it. For example, AI on a small data set, trained on a small data set, predicting something small is different versus trained on a smaller data set, exposed to a bigger amount of data set.
Yes.
So you have to really understand that, and then you have to prepare yourself how exactly AI can help you. Also, I think the other thing is like for smaller use cases, you don't need enough infrastructure around that. You don't need bigger teams and so on. But as you grow into kind of like, solving complex problems, you need an ecosystem around that. And for that ecosystem, you have to be prepared around that.
And so the best part is those baby steps that you take.
Yes.
You don't need a security guardrail to start for the baby steps.
Yeah.
It's only when you think, as you said, organizational wide, or you're thinking like a larger thing.
Yes.
The scaling part of the AI.
Yeah.
That is when security guardrails, all those things should come.
Absolutely.
But it's important that you do those small wins, prove a case to the rest of the business to justify the money that you're going to ask for those bigger things.
Yeah.
And that will cost. It's not like that will not cost. Adding the security layer, having another AI checking what the output of your current AI, all of those things are going to come into picture. You will end up with some expense, but it's not going to be as expensive as Web3 or virtual reality was, right? So it is important that businesses start working on their AI plan today, and they start implementing cases, right? All right. Yes.
I would just add, I think this agile nature that you mentioned, I think is very important because there are a lot of buzzwords in the market. And we as technology advisors, again, we have to educate first of all, our internal stakeholders and then customers and so on. And for that, if you start small and you can prove a point with the proof of concept, or you can bring value on a smaller scale, it will resonate with them much better.
True.
Versus if you just have a presentation deck that you are claiming that AI will do this versus that. So the right approach is what you mentioned.
True.
Have a small model, take some data set, train your model on top of that, and then come up with some
So small wins lead to bigger things. It's like a domino effect.
Yes.
Right? Thank you so much, Aqeel, for your time. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, it was lovely talking to you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.